Hey everybody, it's your life science slash biology teacher, Mr. Poser. Today we are continuing our third unit on matter and energy in living things by wrapping it up with talking about the carbon cycle. And as the name suggests, well, this atom that makes up most of biomolecules and thus most of life itself provides it provides the backbone for our proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids. Well, it cycles. It cycles from living thing to living thing and from non-living thing to non-living thing back to living things and so on and so forth. So a couple questions that I want you to think about before we get into everything here. Maybe you already know the answer, maybe you don't, but hopefully you will know the answer before I ask them again by the end of this video. Here's the first one. Even if you only eat meat, you still depend on plants. Why? So even if you're like, ooh, I hate Brussels sprouts and broccoli, I'm never going to touch it, you're still very, very dependent on plants. Okay, even if you're a Siberian tiger and you've never eaten an ounce of plant matter in your life, then you're still dependent on plants. And why? Okay, check this out. This area right here at the bottom of the ocean is one of the most biodiverse habitats on Earth. How is that even possible? So think about that. We're at the bottom of the ocean. There's never any sunlight, and there's millions of pounds of pressure. I don't know about millions, but many, many pounds of pressure at the bottom of the ocean. Yet life thrives down there. It's like the rainforest down there. And so why and how is that even possible? So something else to think about over the course of this video. All right, so here let's get started into the content. As I was suggesting before, carbon is the essential atom in biomolecules. It's the backbone of biomolecules on account of its four covalent bonds that it can form. Carbon and oxygen that makes up our cells is passed from the air, the ground, to water, and to living things. And that is what we call the carbon cycle. When it's passed from the atmosphere, say into a living thing, then the living thing goes to another living thing, then it goes to the ground, then it could go to the water, it could go to deeper water, then it could go back to the atmosphere. That is all part of the carbon cycle. And something that living things need to do in order to stay alive is take in carbon to make up their proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, but they also need to get rid of waste. Okay, so by getting rid of waste, you're also releasing carbon back into the environment. Because think about it, those four biomolecules that we were discussing a few units ago, or 1 unit ago, all of them have carbon and oxygen in it. And carbon is the primary element that makes up all of those. All right, so we all need it, and how do we get it? Well, let's recap just a little bit here, because this is the central component of the carbon cycle here. Here's our photosynthesis equation. Hopefully you pretty much know this by now. If you don't, then go back to that photosynthesis video a couple weeks ago. And of course, here is our cellular respiration equation. And the question I'm asking you is, what do you notice between these two equations? They're very similar, but if you take a very, very close look, the reactants of photosynthesis are the products of cellular respiration, and the reactants of cellular respiration are the products of photosynthesis. They flip-flop. Okay, it's the photosynthesis overall equation is just the reverse of cellular respiration. Okay, so we can see a pretty clear pattern here that one thing feeds into the next, and if we really think about it, it is a cycle between the chloroplast and the mitochondria, and that keeps occurring. And this has been occurring since photosynthesis and cellular respiration have been a thing in living things. So for about 2 billion years or so, this keeps going and going and going. It never ends. So really what we're looking at here is that the mitochondria, the main source of energy for a cell, the main source of ATP, well, it needs glucose and oxygen to be able to do that. And where does that come from? It comes from the chloroplast, thanks to a little bit of light energy that it converts into chemical bonds. It's able to convert that light energy into ATP and heat using that glucose and oxygen. And what does the mitochondrion get rid of? It gets rid of carbon dioxide and water, which coincidentally is exactly what the chloroplast needs to do in order to start photosynthesis. So this thing keeps going on and on and on and on. But the important thing that I want you to note here is that matter cycles and energy flows. The energy from light over here is the same exact energy that's being used to power you and keep you alive right now. The ATP that your cells are using, the energy stored in those molecules, is the energy that came from sunlight. Okay, so it's dark out right now, but the sunlight that comes down to and hits the earth every day is the same exact energy that keeps you alive, which is crazy, right? But it's really this is essential biology right here. This is how living things get matter and energy and how they exchange it. So as I was just saying, the energy from sunlight is stored into high energy bonds of ATP, which is energy usable by all living things. You are literally solar powered. Even anaerobic organisms like, say, yeast or different types of bacteria that don't need oxygen in order to make their ATP, they still need to be able to take in carbon and get rid of other carbon in the form of waste. And they still need this energy flow and matter cycling. This is essential for all living things. All right, so let's get a little bit more into the carbon cycle here. There's some additional components here, and we're not going to make this too complicated. As you can see from my diagram here, we're going to make it out of emojis, so it really can't be that complicated, right? So here we go. All right, we're going to set up a carbon cycle here in a second, but I do want to show you what all the emojis represent. Okay, so the plants or the tree represent plants or producers, and our definition of producers was in our photosynthesis video, so I'm not going to define it here too. But they are organisms that convert another form of energy into chemical energy for itself and other organisms to use. The sun is the sun. The cloud represents carbon in the atmosphere, so carbon dioxide and oxygen in the atmosphere. The bunny represents consumers, which are organisms that consume other organisms for matter and energy. The mushroom represents decomposers, organisms that get matter and energy from dead and decaying organisms. So death is going to play a role in the carbon cycle here in just a second. And finally, combustion, which is a fancy word for burning stuff. More specifically, burning organic matter. So burning molecules that come from a dead thing, like once living thing. Or it could, once living thing. Let's go with that. Okay, so that's what's going on here. And we're going to be drawing some arrows to show the directions of where carbon and oxygen go within this cycle here. And I have them in 3 different colors. The blue line is representing oxygen, red line is representing carbon dioxide, and the brown line is representing other organic molecules. All right, so photosynthesis is going to be our first part of the carbon cycle here. It is putting oxygen back into the atmosphere, but it's the main thing that's removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Okay, so if you plant more trees, we can remove more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and this is a really important concept in this day and age. Okay, so photosynthesis, I'd like you to label that if you're making this diagram for me. Cellular respiration, it's kind of like the opposite. It's putting carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, but it's taking in oxygen. So think about what you breathe in and what you breathe out. That's because of your cellular respiration. You're taking your glucose that you get from your food and combining that pretty much in a way with your oxygen that you breathe in order for your cells to make ATP, right? So you're putting carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere and taking out oxygen. Another big component of this, obviously, is, well, how do consumers get energy? How do they get their carbon? It's from eating stuff. Okay, so we're not plants. We can't just go outside and photosynthesize and make our own glucose. So we have to eat stuff in order to get our glucose. So organic molecules go from the plant to the consumer here, or the producer to the consumer. And, if we wanted to add more links to the chain, we could. We could make this a whole food chain, because there's consumers that eat the producers, there's consumers that eat the consumers that eat the producers, and so on and so forth. Okay, so those are trading organic molecules, and as I said before, a big part of the carbon cycle is death. Without life, or without death, there can be no life, right? So what's happening here is that these plants and animals, once they die, well, these organisms called decomposers, not only are they going to be using that carbon and using those organic molecules for their own energy and also releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, they're going to be returning a lot of the carbon into the soil, into the ground, if we're talking about a terrestrial ecosystem here. So a lot of that carbon that came from dead things is going to be return to the soil. And if it stays there long enough, it gets formed into a fossil fuel. Okay, think about it, a fossil fuel. You've heard that word before. It's like gas, coal, all that stuff. Hey, but why is it called a fossil fuel? Well, it's because it came from a living thing once upon a time. So the gas in your car could have come from a dinosaur or something that a dinosaur ate, etc. But what we're doing with fossil fuels, and by we I mean human beings, we dig up those fossil fuels, that carbon from those dead, really old dead things. We dig that up and then we burn it. And what happens when we burn it? Well, the carbon dioxide goes back into the atmosphere, and then it takes in a little bit of oxygen too. But we got multiple ways. So we got actually 3 different ways that carbon dioxide is going back into the atmosphere, and only one way carbon dioxide is coming out of the atmosphere. And this is actually a big problem in today's day and age. But that will be a topic for another video. I just wanted you to know how carbon cycles between living things and between their environment. All right, and this is it. This is our carbon cycle. This is what I'm going to ask you to know. All right, so please let me know if you have any questions, and we will see you next time.